pro-Israel than Trudeau was, but Poilievre would be the clear pro-Zionist candidate. The NDP.
What is Zion? I don't understand. What is in Zionism? What's the Zion in Zionism? Is that from the movie The Matrix?
We're not talking the Torah tonight. Let's not.
I'm just asking a question because, what is the Zionism, with regards to a candidate? It's just a question I'm asking.
You know what it is. You know what it is. Anyways.
Is that like a Jewish Israel or a majority Jewish Israel? Is that what it really means? Because, it's, it's a little spiritual. It's in the books. I'm just saying it's, sacred writing. Yeah, it's text. It's at the shores of Babylon.
It's a Jewish Zion. It's a Jewish state. That's what it is. That's what it means. A Jewish state.
But what does a Canadian politician have to do with the Jewish state? Nothing. It's all just, it's rhetoric.
Edmund, stop being a douche and go with the title.
Yeah, sorry, comedian. I'm trying, but All right, so I'm gonna get in front of the computer here, so we'll get some more results. The votes are starting to come in. Again, we're looking at, I think it's 172 is the magic number to get the majority government.
Your thoughts? I think these are very well thought out ideas. So I think own it.
So, yeah, and that's I think you were talking more about the moral.
Let's just trade bags.
I think the focus of the conversation.
It took quite a long time to get to Erasmus, and so when
that's suave.
Big and powerful falls,
yeah, but I didn't bring it.
Recover, and I think that's going on here. And then even once it recovers, it's not as though that
come to my place.
It's not the same as its old. Byzantine Rome had very much Western Rome, All
right, but I've just never seen convincing evidence that the amount of trade and literacy and so forth in the Muslim world in the year 1450 was significantly different from 1250 or 1150.
When was the Mughals? When was that?
1200s or 1100s? I think that
later.
Yeah, I mean, their peak, dominating Western India, I think that was a bit later, like 1500s.
Mongols. Sorry, I thought you said Mongols.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 1200s till about 1700s, I think, when the British fully took over.
Because that was kind of a golden age in India. It was pretty good there. So.
Well, yes, I think in the 1600s, the East India Trading Company had presence, but very weak, subtle presence in India, and the Crown sent a message to whoever who was managing the East India Trading Company and told them, look, can we add India to our colonial assets? And the guy's like, no, the standing army is 4 million people. They I think they had 2/3 of the world's GDP at the time, so India was very powerful and very strong during the reign of Aurangzeb specifically. But he was so powerful and such a micromanager that when he died, just everything kind of collapsed. It took about 100 years for the British to fully take control. But India, in terms of wealth, and in terms of strength, in terms of economy, in terms of I don't know about actually scientific innovation, but they were very powerful up until the late 1600s.
Bro, India is not a joke, man. India is heavy. Medieval India was crazy. If you go look up all those temples, the architecture, my God. There's this one temple in Sri Lanka. It's built on top of a mountain, and we don't even know how they were able to get up. There's some weird stuff going on in India, bro. I'm telling you, man. That's okay. If you know me,
I don't think
Dan always says that, but man,
I don't think Sri Lankans are going to be happy with you calling them Indians.
Well, okay, it was during the time, I think it was during the Gupta period. so it was the same sort of empire. But there's the Kailasa temple in India, and then there's that temple in Sri Lanka, the Shugura, I don't know how to say it, this Sigara. Just type in SUG temple in Sri Lanka. It's like on a mountain, bro. And there's no indication. How were they able to climb up? I'm telling you, bro, there's more temple structures. I think India has the most medieval temples in the world.
Are you trying to suggest aliens, or what's happening?
No, I was just suggesting that the technology that they had to build that temple, the one in Sri Lanka,
Oh yeah, I'm looking at it now. Yeah, that's very impressive.
Bro, you go watch the documentaries and see the videos, bro. It's. I almost fell off my chair watching that thing. Because how do you climb up that mountain? Like, there's no ladder that you can use to. And how do you bring the stones? Unless they had like some kind of flying device or something. It's ridiculous.
Aliens, man, I'm telling you.
It's ridiculous. But the world was a big place. The medieval times was a big place. And like, if you look at the rise and fall of civilizations, sometimes it's not so much that like they did something wrong for their golden age to collapse, but maybe they just, like, when you're looking at something for a long time and you just get too familiar with it, and then somebody else will just come on and build upon what you started. And I think that's what led to the Renaissances in Europe. By the time you come to the 1500s, they already had the manuscripts from the Arabs, and they had manuscripts from the Greeks and the Romans, and people were trading, and they just built upon what these people were doing, and they took it to another level. It's like a progression, almost. That's what I think happened. And then the Islamic sort of golden age you had to sort of take a bypass, go into the shadows, and then you start seeing the rise of the so-called Enlightenment, and then you have all these different thinkers in Europe.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's why I have a problem with this idea of a golden age, because when we say golden age, we mean a specific dynasty, a limited geographical location, and with relation to a specific observer as well. But like, for example, the Safavids, which came up at about the 1500s, the third leader, Shah Abbas, again, kind of left all the sectarian stuff, and he started, first of all, trading with Europe, but also like pushing into culture and science and innovation stuff in Iran around that time as well. So like, that's nothing to do with the Abbasids. And the example that I mentioned of the Mughals, like, it's different periods, different dynasties, and different times. And even though they all shared like an Islamic ethos, even though some of them were Shia, some of them were Sunnis, like, that's why there is no such thing as a caliphate. It was just different dynasties that reached their peak at different times and then kind of collapsed for whatever reason.
Oh, I wanted to say something also about the printing press, because the in Baghdad, in the Abbasid, the Al-Hikmah Al-Bayt, I was reading a book that said that they basically learned how to make paper from a family called the Barmakid family. It was like some family in Asia.
Yeah.
So they learned how to make paper from there. So then by the time you get to the printing press now, it's almost like, I'm sure somebody must have realized, okay, well, if we can make paper, I don't know how they did it. Surely now we can be able to start printing and mass producing, and then you had newspapers and so on and so forth. So that's just one more thing I wanted to mention before. But if you know about the Barmakids, if you're laughing, that means you know a lot about Islamic history.
So
conspiracy surrounding those guys.
So the way they got paper was during one of their campaigns. They arrested some Chinese soldiers or something, or someone from China, and they had paper with them. And like the Abbasids were like, we want this, and so they made them train like local Abbasids how to make paper, and that's how paper came into the Abbasid Empire. But back to the Barmakids. So basically, when the Abbasid Empire came to power, it was initially a politically Shiite revolution. I don't know how deep to get into this, because I don't want to bore you guys. But basically, that's why the Abbasid Empire came from Iran. And so the first 2 or 3 leaders of the Abbasid Empire, which is Abu Ja'far al-Mansur and Abu al-Abbas al-Saffah, anyways, 2 people, they settled in Iran before moving on to Iraq. And while they settled in Iran, they made really close connections to this family called the Barmaki family. And they became their confidants. And so when Abu Ja'far passed away, and his son Harun, who's like basically he's synonymous with the Golden Age.
Yes,
Came to power. He was Harun Rashid, correct? Yeah. So when Harun Rashid came to power, he was very young. I think he was like 17 or 19 or something, so really, really young. And so the Barmakis took over as kind of like caretakers. And until he became in his like late 20s, he was fine with it because he didn't notice a difference, like he was so wealthy. But then eventually it reached a level where they were actually more in control of the state than he was. They brought like a 500,000 soldier contingent from Iran and settled them in Iraq, in Baghdad. So that basically he had no power. And so he spent, like once he figured it out, he spent 5 years trying to get as many of the like soldiers and generals and stuff under his trust and control as he could, who were like all Arabs, because again there was like a very ethnic or like a Persian versus Arab thing happening at the time. And eventually overnight he, like Harun Rashid, carried out a coup. Even though he was in charge, he carried out a coup against all the Barmakis. He killed them all. He had them cut up into beheaded and stuff, and stuck on the streets. The Risafa Bridge, which is one of the major bridges in Iraq, to kind of affirm his rule and to tell people like the Barmaki reign is over and it's in my hand now. So that's why when he said Barmaki, they're like, oh yeah, I know that story.
Yeah.
It's really such a fucking trick, man. Like everything you read a little bit of it, and it just like completely opens a new world.
Yeah, and then you get to Caliph Mahmoud, was his son. It's this. So when you look at the transition of these empires, you also see a lot of infighting. There's a lot of things that contribute to
100%.
the rise and fall of golden ages. And then you add in the Crusades with the Europeans and the wars that were going on between the Franks and the Saracens and the so-called blackamoors, and then you had the Ummah. Like all these different things were going on at that time period. So, I'm just adding on to what you were saying, but it's very interesting.
Incredible.
At least I think it's
like even Ma'mun, for example, Al-Ma'mun was his father's choice. So Harun Rashid, before he died, he wanted Al-Ma'mun to be in power. She wanted Al-Amin to be in power. But the other son, Al-Ma'mun, his mom was very keen on him coming into power. And because he was half Persian, eventually he became the one who was the Khalifa. And so that led to a whole list of clusterfucks, which again, it may be beyond the scope of this room. But yeah, definitely. All of these things, I guess, coming together, like the ethnic element, the sectarian element, the political element, the geographic element, all of these things come together, and then just incredible things happen. So it becomes difficult to say with any certainty that the majority reason for this decline or for this increase or for this whatever is that factor, because there's always so many factors at play.
And if you come to today, obviously now these empires are gone and we have nation states and so on and so forth. But it's almost like we're beginning to see the rise of a new, I don't want to say a new golden age, but a new age is coming in. Have any of you read Sam Huntington's Clash of Civilizations? This book
I didn't
he
read
wrote
the book,
in
but I know the ideas.
The idea is that the world is moving into a polarized time where little nation states are going to become almost irrelevant, and it's going to be about building civilizational blocks. And he wrote this book in the 1990s. He predicted a lot of the things that are happening right now, like the wars in the Middle East and so on and so forth, the rise of the Islamic population, the decline of the European birth rates and stuff like that. A very controversial book he wrote in the 1990s. And what he was saying is that basically you have Western civilization, and then you've got the so-called Islamic civilization, and then you've got the Eastern communist sort of civilizations. All these different civilizational blocks are emerging on the planet Earth, and that's it's a sign of advancement, that we're no longer in these little tribal ethno states, but now we're building empires based on civilizational, and civilizations are usually based on principles, right? So what's Western civilization built on? You guys can tell me. Certain values, right? A certain heritage, there's certain traditions.
I don't know. I don't subscribe to books written in the 90s as blueprints for what's happening at the moment. I don't know what's happening at the moment. It's so violent and so unlike everything we've seen in the last 100 years. I can't claim to know what's going to happen.
That book was very accurate, my friend. I'm telling you, it's happening right now. I mean, you can see the. And what's happening in the West, and you guys will tell me you live in the West, is you're beginning to see the West is trying to redefine itself, and then you have this whole left-wing, right-wing dichotomy, and it's like a return to traditionalism and Judeo-Christian values, or we need to embrace a more pluralistic society with secularism and all the things that come with that. So like the geopolitical landscape is a civilization. It's a civilizational discourse. Like you can see now people warming up to Russia and China because of certain things in the media, and people warming up to communism and socialism. But it's really more of a civilization. It's a civilizational conversation. And then now you've got the whole Islamic thing. You've got people like Andrew Tate converting to Islam, and Islam is becoming very popular all of a sudden. Yeah, he is, but regardless of what he is, he's very influential, right? Especially among young people. It's politics. It's geopolitics. Maybe he was paid to convert to Islam. I don't know.
Yeah, he's definitely paid to become Muslim. I don't think anyone paid him. I think he just saw a lot of opportunity in, easy to influence young brown men, and he's like, okay, but if I'm Muslim, I'll just get a lot of people to join my Tate University or whatever the fuck it's called. But look, I don't think Islam is currently a civilizational force. I think there's always a potential, and it's like as a deconstructionist Islamist, I definitely think it has a role. But currently, I don't think it has anything. Like most countries now, whether it's, for example, Iran is under, Russian or let's say Russian circle of influence, and the Gulf countries and Iraq and stuff are under this American Zionist, not Iraq, actually Iraq is but the Gulf, for example, and Egypt and Tunisia and Morocco are under the American/Zionist circle of influence. So a lot of these leaders are not really Muslim leaders. They're just paid, criminals for these forces. And there is no wave, there is no movement. Really the most promising, you could say, movement was the Muslim Brotherhood, but that's getting shut down and banned in most countries now. So, that's really impacted how Muslims think of themselves as a civilizational force. It's because there's no one to carry it. The principles are all impractical or outdated or kind of very heavily influenced by 1950s, 1960s left-right discourse. So we need new leaders. We need new thinkers. I don't know how that's going to happen.
That's why the Mahdi is here, Nasser.
Mahdi, yeah, I subscribe to eschatological theories. So yeah.
Sam knows him. Sam, you know the Mahdi, right? He's your friend.
Yeah. Mark.
Which one? The new one?
Yeah, the new one.
What have you heard about the new Mahdi, Mark?
What's his name? Al-Qaim? That guy? The guy's got a TikTok account?
There's a new Mahdi. I Googled his manifesto. He just seems like a random crazy person.
The guy with the beanie, right? He's always with a beanie.
Yes. The beanie.
Yeah, I love that guy. He's so good. I love his interviews. It's just so wildly crazy. His claims are so ambitious. Well done to you for putting yourself out there.
Yeah, he claims to have written some document, some hadith or something, where Muhammad wrote his name, that he would be the Mahdi or something like that.
So the interesting thing about this, Ben, is this Mahdi doesn't use Sunni eschatology. He uses Shia eschatology. So a lot of the stuff that he claims, no Sunni has heard it because it's prevalent in Shia eschatological writings. And so he uses terms that I've never recognized before. He mentions, he said, a hadith and stuff, but none of it we know. And so I have no way of verifying whether or not it's completely bullshit or not. But I'm just really enjoying the ride. Just the way that he takes himself so seriously. Oh, so good.
It's fascinating to study, man. This is what they call the end times, right? The Abrahamic believers.
Yeah,
this is what you guys believe, right?
I think the end times, like I said, 100% fascinating. But the end times is an eschatological theory that there are signs for how the world ends, and when you see these signs, it means the world is ending soon. But these signs have been coming up since the death of the Prophet. right? So one of the first signs is when the Prophet dies, then the end times will come. So I think like the world will end when it ends. I don't think we have any signal or anything that we can tell this is going to happen.
Okay.
So I think
we should hear the words of the Mahdi himself.
Is that every time one of the messengers were sent, the people belied him, mocked him, and rejected him. Jeremiah the prophet said, I am ridiculed all day long. Everyone mocks me. The scholars of religion, the Pharisees and rabbis, the preachers and priests were the greatest enemies of the messengers of God. As Jesus ﷺ said, but woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves, nor allow those who would enter to go in. And when the Arabs mocked Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, never comes a messenger to them, but they ridicule him. And no.
Alright, well, they're all wearing black beanies, all the men. Apparently that's their thing, those black beanies. He seems to be taking himself really seriously. His YouTube channel is called The Mahdi Has Appeared, is his YouTube channel, which I'm going to subscribe to.
Yeah. Look, if you're in that world, I do think that you should listen to him. He's got very interesting exegesis of scripture, and he's got very interesting stories from Shia tradition. And I mean, he's just like another imam or preacher, if you ask me. That's just how I see him. He's very calm in the way he sits down, and very calculated in the way he explains himself, and so on and so forth. But if you're outside, like for me, I'm not in that thing anymore. I'm not really in the Abrahamic faith anymore. I'm just watching, and I'm like, okay, well, let's see who's back. Because this to me, this is all political. Like at the end of the day, the Mahdi, the Messiah, these are all political figures who are supposed to come in and usher in some kind of golden age, and people are supposed to rule over us from Jerusalem or wherever they're from. It's politics. So who's financing him? If he succeeds, let's say somehow he was able to get the whole world to believe on him, or most of the world to believe in him, right? In the Abrahamic faith. This is what's going to happen? People are going to start following him, and they're going to build a new temple, and they're going to destroy the Kaaba, and all these prophecies are going to be fulfilled. And then the golden age comes in, and all of a sudden now we've got 0-point energy, and we've got flying cars, and he's developing his own electric cars. And I won't be surprised if these are the kind of things that he attempts to do. Because at the end of the day, this is politics to me. That's all this is. He's a mouthpiece.
Can I play the real Mahdi?
Yeah, sure.
I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis. Ehudi Dina Esinani, Melisana Gai, Rui Dimenaru, Ashiki, Ishakangai.
Nice.
Great movie.
None of you can stand before me. You cannot speak. You have to kill me. It's the only way. I'm pointing the way.
Yeah, man. It's very dramatic. But this is the world of most people. Most people are in this world. It's like I don't know how to explain it to you guys. If you ever been a religious person, because I was, and then I moved on. It's a very immersive experience. When you're in it, you think it's real. And it is real in some sense, but it's like on a spectrum almost. Like on a how do you say it? Like almost like on a lower level. To them, this is how they see the world. They see Mahdis and Messiahs and gods and spirits. But then when you start maturing, you start seeing what it really is, and you start seeing the politics, and you start seeing it's about leadership, it's about changing the world, it's about building a better world, golden age. It's about perfecting the human being, right? If you study Judaism and they speak about Adam Kadmon, man perfected. It's about perfecting and tikkun olam and all these things. You ever studied these concepts before, Sam? rectifying the world and making the world a better place.
No.
I thought you were Jewish, bruh.
I'm an atheist, bro, which is the most Jewish thing to do in the world.
Anyway, it's these, these are just concepts at the end of the day. Just concepts. But that movie was dope, man. That the Dune movies, heavy.
I love it.
I enjoyed them. Man. Both movies.
They're literally amazing.
Frank Herbert is very influenced by Islam, and you can tell. But it's like not in a.
You mean the Mahdi and the Jihad? You mean that?
It's if you read the books, it's just like everywhere.
So, Ben, I know that you're being accused of Afrocentrism and stuff. What's some stuff that makes people accuse you of that you believe?
Not me. I tend to be very historically sound in the information I present. But usually, if you say things like, Egyptians were black people, and you don't explain which group of black people, because not all black people were Egyptians, and my people were Egyptians. I don't think that Egyptians were Bantus. But if, when you say things like that, then people will accuse you of being Afrocentric. Or if you say,
I think if you say like, do you think if you told a person lived like anywhere in the Middle East or Africa in that time period that like do you think that people today would consider them all?
maybe by American standards, I suppose. I mean, if Beyonce is considered black, where I'm from, people would think she's mixed race, the way she looks.
I think that the people of most of the pharaohs looked like North Africans today. They look like Copts. They look like vaguely northern African. That's what I think the Egyptians look like. Now there probably were some kingdoms, like for example the Nubians, I think, took over Egypt for some time. There was literally some kingdoms where there were just black people ruling Egypt. But I think the majority was just North African looking people.
I think even in like the Old Kingdom, they like traded Nubia. There was a lot of like, I don't know. There's probably a lot of like mixing, basically.
Well, they said they came from the south. The king, his name was Menes. Nama, some the Egyptians called him Nama, the Greeks called him Menes. He came from a place called Tinis. And Tinis, if you go look it up, Manetho says that it was in the south. Ta-Nehesi, that was the name of the place. Ta-Nehesi. And it was the Kushite lands. And the first state that was established in Egypt was actually called Ta-Seti, which is the same name that was given to the kingdom of Kush.
You gotta admit they had cool swords then, right? You're a sword man.
So, yeah. But saying that the modern... Anyway, somebody's saying, where's this conversation going? This might be boring for other people who are listening. But, those are the kind of things that that lead people to call people Afrocentrics. Like especially the modern Egyptians. They get very annoyed when you say things. Because obviously the modern Egyptians, they look different from the murals that we see in the 18th dynasty and the 15th dynasty. The Temple of Luxor and the DNA studies that have been done. The Egyptians were Nilo-Saharan.
The murals represent the ancient Egyptians as kind of brownish, not black, and they have like murals where they present black people, obviously different from their kind of main representation of themselves.
They also do things like sometimes they'll paint the men and women in slightly different colors. It's not because men and women actually have different skin tones, but the DNA evidence is pretty dispositive. And in fact, the further back you go in time, in terms of ancient DNA sequence, the lower the contribution of sub-Saharan, detectable sub-Saharan African ancestry. I'm sure they had a small amount back then, but it was like a very small minority.
Yeah, I do doubt the way that the paintings show people's skin colors quite a bit. It's like, we know there's so much variation in art in terms of
They
like
show
how
them correctly. Like the skin color that they show is basically the same as the Arabs today. Like they're all this like Semito-Hamitic like group or whatever.
I mean, it's not just the skin color. You can see the hair. Can you see my profile picture right now? This is Amenhotep III. It's clearly an afro. like, bro, there's so much evidence that those people were black Africans.
That looks like a
Not even-
headpiece, but
It's a fragmented painting. I mean, I can get you others.
yeah, but doesn't that look more like a headpiece to you than
You know what? Do me a favor, Sodi. Just go on the internet and type in Ahmose the First. He's the founder of the 18th dynasty. Ahmose the First. Like, you don't need to have a. I can show you the genetic studies as well. They tested the PTR, whatever that means, PTR of the people. They tested the haplogroups. They tested the mummies. They even found 1,000 mummies at Adaima necropolis, and those the dental morphology of those mummies matched tribes in East Africa, so-called sub-Saharan.
I mean, I googled
Yeah,
it, but like almost everything I'm seeing has a headpiece.
Yeah, I mean,
the
look at
haplogroup.
It is an
I mean, that's a black African man. That's not even something you need to think twice about.
I'm not even against you saying that.
Yeah, I'm like,
The haplogroups don't match modern day Egyptians at all, and as I said before, the further back you go, the less they resemble them. And I mean, the somatic DNA, while more telling, it's rarer. But I mean, what somatic DNA we have from ancient bodies from 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, like just is very obviously completely different from any sub-Saharan African population, and is, as we would predict, very similar to ancient Levantine populations because they are, after all, Ravens.
And
Okay,
again,
what is that?
they have murals.
the
They
study
have
that
murals that compare ethnic groups. Like they have murals that are the paint is still extant, where they're like, okay, let's represent, like the Mediterraneans here. Let's represent like the Nubians here, and let's represent us there. And it's like 3 different skin colors on the mural. Like the Nubians are dark, like
Yeah, I
the
think
Egyptians
so.
are represented kind of brownish, and the Mediterraneans, like Greeks or whomever they were painting, or some proto-Greeks, are presented as lighter skinned. It's like, okay, like,
Yeah, but the point is that like we see all kinds of examples of artwork like that, where the skin colors are like the differences are like exaggerated. Like I don't know. I just don't know how much you can trust stuff like that. Like, Mark, were those Levantine?
No,
Well,
definitely
Mark, the study that you're speaking
Well,
about.
definitely not. Are you sure? Wait, how do we know?
because we have very complete, essentially, samples of somatic DNA, and it really, really closely, the population that it most closely resembles, and is in fact almost indistinguishable from, would be modern day Samaritan peoples who are, olive skinned, I guess, but obviously not black.
Yeah, the Levantine.
Could they have formed?
They were not black. They were not black. Except for maybe if you want to talk about the Natufians, there is some debate about who they were because they have.
Go far enough back, they were.
Yeah, sure. If you start going into like prehistory and stuff like that, that's when you start talking about the Natufians and other things. But the study that Mark is speaking to, and I think that he's also referencing, is a study that was done in 2017, where they tried to say that the modern Egyptians have actually gained sub-Saharan African ancestry compared to the ancient Egyptians. Yeah, that's the one you're referencing. And that study has been so routinely attacked by so many scholars. There's Christopher Earhart, even Zahi Hawass has tried to push back against that study a little bit, because what they did is they tested 155 mummies, but of those 155 mummies, only 4 of them were used as evidence to support those claims. And all 4 of them, I think only 3 of them were from, 3 of them were from Ptolemaic times when the Greeks and Romans were ruling in Egypt. And then 1 of them was from the pre-Ptolemaic period.
So
you can go look up the study, the 2017, it was called the Fayum study. And Fayum was a Greek settler. Like, this is the thing about, sorry Mark, I don't want to interrupt you, just, this argument, we can go, for 10, 15 minutes, I don't want to sound like I'm being combative. It's just there's a lot of information that people need to understand talking about who the ancient Egyptians were. So, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I don't know if we're talking about the same study. This one appears to be from 2018, which is close but not quite 2017. They're definitely using more than just, they're definitely testing more than 3 or 4 samples. I mean, I think it's something like 70. I'll have to open it up and look.
Place the link in the chat. Is it the one from Fayum?
I'm Googling Fayum. I'm not seeing it appear, but maybe it just doesn't appear in the proper text of the study. Anyway, hold on, give me a second. I'll find it on my phone and I'll.
Yeah, because there's another study that was done on the limb proportions of the ancient Egyptians, and I'm literally quoting what the study says here. It says that such proportions are termed super negroid. That's the term that they use to describe these limb proportions. They match the people in Sudan, South Sudan, and Sudan today.
I mean,
and then you have the trichology test that they tested the hair samples, and then we have the melanin dosage test that Sheikh Diop did in the 1960s.
so who are the people that you're referring to who are doing whatever studies you're referring to?
So the first one I mentioned here, it's called Pre-Dynastic Egyptian Stature and Physical Proportions. I'm putting the name of it in the chat now. And I just read the abstract.
So this is from 1986. I mean, it's probably going to be extremely out of date given the leaps and bounds in archaeogenetics that we've been able to, make in the last 20 years.
I don't think this one is from 1986. It says
the ones from Robbins and Shute.
Yes, Robbins, Shute, Christ College, Cambridge, England. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 1986.
Okay. So do you think they've made a mistake or something, or were those?
I mean, I just don't think that this kind of physical anthropology is remotely as reliable a guide to ancestry as genetics / archaeogenetics. Like they're measuring, the relative length of someone's, thigh bone or whatever. It's going to tell you a lot less than what their DNA says.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I said there's a lot of data. So we can look at the DNA and what we've been able. I can also show you some DNA studies as well. Specifically, you notice I'm focusing on the 18th dynasty because that's the one that seems to have a lot of what they call Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic DNA. Not Bantu. I didn't say Bantu or Nilotic, but Nilo-Saharan. Let me see. I'm just looking at the one you just sent now. 4,000-year-old Egyptian mummy head. Is this one mummy? I've never seen.
I'm trying to find the one I was thinking of. I don't know about this one actually. The one I was thinking of used definitely at least 70 samples. Trying to find it though. So I might take a second since I can't really talk and Google effectively at the same time.
No, it's fine. And I got a new phone, so I used to have a whole list of studies that I used to keep up on my. But then obviously outside of the DNA studies, you also have Herodotus, you have Pliny, you have all these ancient writers who were very unconfused about the ancient Egyptians. They grouped them in with the Ethiopians, said they had black skin, woolly hair, and so on and so forth. And then you have even the Bible says that the Egyptians are the sons of Ham.
I mean, we have really realistic paintings, essentially portraits of ancient Egyptians from the time of like Pliny or so. They clearly don't look anything remotely like Nilotic peoples.
Well, okay, so now we're talking about the Fayum portraits, right? From the time of let's just say maybe 200 AD, 100 AD.
Something like that. I mean, that's not very far off from Pliny.
Right. Those are the Fayum portraits. And I agree that those ones actually look like modern Egyptians, some of those ones. But there's other ones that people don't look at. See, the ones that people show are the ones that look like modern Egyptians. But there's other Fayum portraits that look very much like the Nubians in Aswan and Nubians in Sudan.
All right, so I apologize for interrupting, but I found on my computer the study I was looking for was different.
Yeah,
although it has partly similar cohort to this. Let me find it. Egyptian nature communications. This one is in fact from 2017. Hold on.
Yeah, that's the one. It's from 2017. The one with
Schuneman, yeah.
Yeah, Schuneman. So if you read that paper, what they'll tell you is that they looked at 155 samples and they selected like 70 something of them, and then of all of those samples, only 4 of them were useful for examination. You gotta read the whole study and you'll see. Like the one I'm looking at here says 90 mitochondrial genomes. Where is it now?
say that?
Sorry, let me just open it up again. My screen is frozen. Okay, so it says here we present 90 mitochondrial genomes as well as genome-wide data sets from the individuals obtained from Egyptian mummies. The samples recovered Middle Egyptian span around 1300 years of ancient Egyptian history. Our analysis revealed that ancient Egyptians shared more ancestry with Levantines, yada yada yada.
It may be the case that only 4 samples were useful for autosomal DNA, but not for mitochondrial DNA.
Maybe
Even that I'm not.
I actually think it was for everything, that there were only 4 that were used for everything.
No,
Which
it's
is why there
because
was so much uproar about this.
unfortunately the mummification process, while good for preserving bodies in some respects, tends to destroy the parts of the body that we usually harvest autosomal DNA from, or at least archaeogeneticists do. So it's really, really hard and uncommon to be able to get autosomal samples from ancient mummies, although we can still get mitochondrial samples.
So, did the Kushites only conquer Egypt once during the Napata period?
No, Kushites founded Egypt, as I said before. I said to you, the first state of Egypt was founded by Kushites. Nama was from the south, or Menezi was from the south. And then,
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
So that was the first time, and then I think there were subsequent dynasties. I think it was the 5th dynasty. Nubians have always had a heavy presence in Egypt, but then the most famous one is the 25th dynasty. That's when Tahaka came in, and that's when even mainstream historians will say yes, that's when Kushites finally came in and conquered Egypt.
Yeah. That's 744 BC, 25th dynasty.
That king was famous too. Tahaka he's even mentioned in the Bible.
So it seems that in this study we have 90 mitochondrial samples that they're comparing with, a comparable number of modern-day Egyptian and Ethiopian samples.
Right.
So we know that, given that the 25th dynasty was black people, they were pharaohs for at least around 100 years or so.
Yeah, we know the 25th dynasty was but that's not even the point of contention. Most people acknowledge that. But the SDRs that were done, where are these? I used to have so many of these studies. Yeah, so anyway, I mean, short answer to your question, that's why people end up accusing, maybe not me, I don't think I've been accused of being Afrocentric, because I'm not an Afrocentric. I don't even think life started in Africa. I'm a little bit far out there. But,
where'd you get artists?
Yeah. India.
India?
But, yeah. But before we get, that's more of a personal belief. It's not something I can necessarily prove empirically. It takes a bit of time.
Do you think
Sanskrit is where the Proto-European languages started? Like, you believe in out of India theory as opposed to the Yamnaya invasions from?
I haven't studied that particular theory in depth, but obviously Sanskrit is connected to But I do think that there was obviously an Aryan, what they call an Aryan migration. Now they used to call it an Aryan invasion. There was obviously migrations of people from the Caucasus and other parts of Europe came into India. So they exchanged. Or maybe they started in India before they were in Europe. I don't know, but there's a DNA. There are studies that were done on mice, and they did find that the oldest. There's a particular mouse that's found in agriculture. There's a mouse because mice are very fragile creatures. They can't really survive in the wild, right? So when you see that kind of mouse, you know that there's agriculture. And they did some DNA sequencing of this particular mouse, and they found that the oldest mouse was found in India, and it goes back like 500,000 years, which means that agriculture had to have started in India based on the study. That's one argument that I'm still researching. You go ahead, Mark.
Well, not that I mean to scold you or anything. I don't care or think it ultimately matters that much, but you do seem like a bit of an Afrocentrist to me in that you want to claim various civilizations for, sub-Saharan African ethnicities that are not in fact sub-Saharan African in ethnicity, and want to claim, arguably want to claim civilizational achievements for that group more than the historical records might necessarily justify.
Well, he's only trying to claim like the earliest pharaohs of Egypt. He's not trying to.
I said that my people weren't Egyptians. I said that the ancient Egyptians were Nilo-Saharan culture.
Well,
which is linguistically proven already.
Okay, well, Afrocentrism doesn't mean Bantu-centrism. I mean, the Bantus are not the only sub-Saharan African.
Right.
Wait, hold on, but Mark, who is he claiming besides the early Egyptians? Is he claiming? He's not claiming Indians or African. Right?
Yeah, I didn't say Indians were African.
Well, I didn't accuse him of. I mean, there aren't that many Afrocentrists who want to lay claim to India, as far as I'm aware.
That would be a fun one.
Well, I mean,
believe me, there are African scholars who try to do that.
I mean, just like various African civilizations or societies having like advanced knowledge that was later forgotten or maybe even stamped out, like the scholars of Timbuktu having access to like advanced mathematics. As you just said, I remember in a previous room, from a long time ago. It's been a long time since I've seen. And again, I don't mean to be wagging my finger. I don't dislike you or anything, and I'm not trying to make fun of you. But like, I think you have beliefs about like, that one tribe, the Dogon, having advanced like astronomical knowledge that couldn't be accounted for through ordinary means, that sort of thing. Aliens.
Wasn't there something weird with the Dogon tribe?
Yeah, there was a book called The Pale Fox and the Legend of Anthropologists, and they said that the Dogon had knowledge about Sirius A and B, which is something that we hadn't discovered until the recent 20th century. So that was the only. I think that was the point I was trying to make then. I wasn't as well read as I am now, so nowadays I'm a little bit more calmed down. That was months, maybe almost 6-7 months ago, I think. That was the last time I brought that up. But yeah, I do think the ancient Egyptians were definitely a Black African culture. I'll debate anybody on that subject.
See, Sam?
Way too much data on that, bro. That's like that debate ended with Sheikh Anta Diop and the UNESCO when they invited Theophile Big and Sheikh Anta Diop to the UNESCO conference. That debate ended in the 70s.
All the data, like this fresco from a tomb in the 11th dynasty that I linked, clearly shows that the Nubian wife of the pharaoh is dark skinned and that the Egyptians are only brown skinned. The difference is huge in their own presentation.
Based on the 11th dynasty? I don't understand what he's saying.
He's saying that some 11th dynasty king had a Nubian wife, and they depict the Nubian wife as being very dark skinned compared to the Egyptian.
Have you seen the one of the founders of the 11th dynasty, Mentuhotep II? He's darker skinned than most Nubians. Like, not all Nubians are dark skinned, and not all Egyptians are light skinned. Like, people come in different shades. But there's this obsession with trying to, because you see, the thing is, if Egypt was black, then that means that a lot of what we've been told about.
No one is obsessed with.
Why? I don't know why you interrupted me. I didn't interrupt. interrupted, but I'm just making a point that there's this. It is an obsession on both sides. There's like black people want to see that Egypt was black, and non-black people really like Egypt to not be black, because there's this idea that Egypt was this great ancient civilization, and for the longest time it was not considered African. It was considered European, and then it was considered Middle Eastern, and now people are starting to actually say, actually no, it was most likely an African creation. That's what the Greeks said. And so that go ahead.
Yeah, none of that is true. Like no one like has some like bad sentiment towards black people that want to deprive like their history of this like, great achievement of the Egyptians. Like the people who are like have negative sentiments towards black people are yet the yokels who don't know what ancient Egypt even is. Like and the people who are like out here denying the Hotep revisionist pseudo history are not like you're obsessed with like downplaying black people's ancient achievements, but are like at best what people like that, or I should say like us, can be said to be obsessed with is mainstream historical facts and like not letting people do historical revisionism easily and like just denying mainstream history with some ridiculous, like obviously ethnically motivated theories.
Well, that's go ahead.
I basically think that what's it called? I have no issue with Egyptians being black if they're black. Like you telling me that the 25th dynasty was black? I'm like, oh, cool. 20th dynasty was black, nice. Like I have no interest in. Why would I care? I don't think I'm Egyptian. It's not like no skin off my back. You know what I mean?
So I'm pretty sure most people who are really into ancient Egypt and who are going to deny this kind of like Hotep or Hotep adjacent narrative, like are also going to be into pointing out some interesting facts about sub-Saharan civilizations that are never talked about. It's like, oh, did you know that there's actually like various ancient kingdoms there? That like they had more advanced metallurgy in sub-Saharan Africa than like in the Middle East. The Iron Age came there like way like before, like on the historical timeline that it did like in the Middle East and above. So there's like various interesting facts about like kingdoms and civilizations that everyone agrees are black, that people who like ancient Egypt are going to be also fascinated by and want to promote and want to see, be like, look, like various interesting civilization stuff like down there with black people in sub-Saharan Africa. But so it's like there is no motivation among like these nerds who like Egypt, like, oh, we want to deny that black people like were actually the Egyptians. It's just the fact that the Egyptians weren't black, like they were brown. Like sure, there was like some Nubians there, like several pharaohs, obviously some pharaoh wives, probably lots of civilians were Nubians. Like it was a neighboring kingdom, of course. It was like mixing of people. But whenever Egyptians present themselves visually, they present themselves as brownish people, obviously distinct from Nubians, like taking like the typical kind of image of one and the other. I say typical because, of course, what was said is true. Not all Egyptians were brownish. Some of them were of Nubian origin and were like dark-skinned, and vice versa. Like, of course, like, yeah. But the fact is that the vast majority of them were not black people. They were like brown.
Why is this two questions? Why is this obsession with like if the person is black skinned, they're Nubian? Why can't they just be Egypt? I'm asking you a question. I'm not arguing. I think it's very interesting that you would make that statement. So like, if somebody's black skinned, they're Nubian. Or they have Nubian admixture. There's no like original Egyptian black population, right? Well, why do you say that? Is that just how it is, or I'm just trying to understand?
the original like Egyptian black population, like maybe in some prehistory, like pre dynastic Egypt, like I don't know, but everything we know about the Egyptians, like from their depictions of themselves, they're brown people. They're like Afro-Asiatic, like the Berbers, like all the other like non-Egyptians in North Africa, like the Arabs, whatever.
Yeah. But go ahead.
I'm curious about your India theories. That seems like less contentious. Do you think that humanity started in India, or that civilization started in India?
Well, this is obviously not something that I can empirically defend.
Just give me your guesses.
Yeah.
No, we're not gonna jump
This
on.
is these are just my own personal beliefs. I think that possibly humanity started in India. Possibly.
So, one reason why like Darwin thought it started in Africa before we had any sort of DNA stuff was just that's where the great apes are. So we probably evolved near where our closest ancestors live. What do you think about that? Just that basic of an observation.
Yeah. Because of the great apes and the hominids and so on.
Yeah, I mean, like we obviously are very closely. We look a lot like chimpanzees. So like probably we evolved near where the chimpanzees live. Doesn't that just make it too?
Yeah, I mean it's a good theory. It's the leading theory that doesn't deny the veracity of those claims based on empirical data. I think that the reason why I would reject that is because I have more out there beliefs about what the human being is and where we came from. Because I have so much respect for the spiritual traditions in India, I tend to sort of go with those kind of the information that appears to have come from there. That we had different shapes and sizes, and that there were like even etheric forms that we had, green-skinned people, and these are like stories that I've read from Indian texts, the Puranas and the Mahabharatas, and then even the theosophical texts that emerged later from Blavatsky and so on, other people. And then obviously like the I think India has a very old calendar system. Like they count, they've been doing this for at least 1,000 years that we can trace. They trace humanity going back 300 trillion years. Like what? Like they call it a night of Brahma and so on. So like how do they? Where do they get these ideas from? It could be that they just made it up, right? Which is what I guess most empirical people would do. But I tend to think that there's a lot more to the picture. And I won't lie, a lot of this is also coming from theosophy, which is, I do tend to take Blavatsky's information very seriously. Things that she said she learned in India, in Tibet, the root races and stuff like that. But these are just my own sort of beliefs. These aren't really things that I go around trying to defend. So I'm sharing them because I think that you're cool guys. I know people are listening to me right now, and all the credibility that I had gone out the window.
No, I think
and the way, like, you see, like, the way people engage with Mark, I want that kind of respect. That's actually why I stopped going into some of those other rooms, because I tend to share too much of myself, and then people stop taking me seriously. So sometimes I wish that people would engage with me the way they engage with Mark. But yeah, that these are some of the reasons why I think I take India very seriously. And then there's the study I found on mice as well, and I do think they also say that the oldest language in the world may be Tamil. I don't know how they figured that out, but
What does it mean?
Tamil is it.
What does it mean for one language to be older than another?
Well, it could mean that those people are an ancient culture, right? Their language is the oldest.
I don't understand what it means for language to be older than another. Like, clearly Tamil has evolved from pre-Tamil languages. Are you saying that it sort of froze in time earlier than other contemporary languages? I mean, it's clearly not the first language that human beings ever spoke.
Yeah, but you would think that it would be some African language, right? Theoretically, that some African language would be considered the oldest language, oldest existing language on the planet today. But for some reason, they look at Tamil and other languages from India.
I mean, again, it's not really clear what oldest existing language means. It might just mean the language that has existed. I mean, the language that has more or less existed in terms of mutual intelligibility for the longest. Like, how far back can you go in time and still get speakers who can communicate with modern speakers? But even if that were Tamil, and it's like saying, Bob's the oldest human being, and he's 120 years old, but that's not going to tell us to say that the ethnic group that Bob came from is older than anyone else's ethnic group.
Do linguists think there was a first language? Like, you know how we Proto-European? Is there like a proto, all the other language, where every language comes from? Is there like a...
Yes,
is there like
yes, but we don't know exactly where.
like, do linguists think that happened, or...
I mean, well,
Yes, it's like purely theoretical. Like there has not been any connection between like the language families that they've been managed to find like trying to tie down, for example, in the Europeans with the Afroasiatics. Like they know that those two are families, but they haven't managed to like find a route connecting the families together. I mean, there are certain words that span the families, but they're usually linguists don't really want to claim that they show per language maybe they're connected to something else, like words like mama, for mother, and similar like kind of variations on that. Because when I say like, well, probably it has something to do with babies babbling, like not really like an ancient language.
historical linguistics doesn't really work past the 6,000 to 10,000 year mark, if it works even then.
But
like I think the oldest sort of language that we can sort of indirectly infer the existence of, I guess, would be Proto-Afroasiatic, maybe 8,000 to 10,000 years old, but that number is extremely speculative, and we definitely can't go back like 50 to 100,000 years. And of course, I'm sure human languages are at least 50 to 100,000 years old, if not like 200 to 500,000 years old.
But aren't there like population bottlenecks that are like really extreme that happen in history? Like
if you take seriously like some sort of saltationist view of human evolution that some modern philosophers and scientists take, like that there was just a few, or some people like Chomsky would say maybe even one mutation in our brain that produced like the behaviorally modern human from the anatomically modern human. That would mean that like Homo sapiens, like, as we know it, as we are, started with one person and like descended from that who first had the mutation, and that their descendants carried the mutation, and we have like behaviorally modern humans from there. So like those populations would need to communicate somehow, I guess. They would have some. That would be the proto-language, however they communicated with each other.
So, okay, 74,000 years ago, there's the Toba catastrophe, where there's like from like 2,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals that survive. I mean, this is debated, but it's like a thing that, and if that's true, then like a bottleneck of that sort should cause there to be just a. I mean, I guess the 10,000 don't have to breeding individuals don't have to be isolated, don't have to be in the same place. So I guess it doesn't need to be that there's the one language. But yeah.
There is like a weird, I remember way back in high school, professor mentioning some analysis that's like very, very loose, like it's not like really a basis for anything like a strong claim. But they did like an analysis of vowel evolution. They kind of took their best theories in how vowel evolution functioned in various European languages, like from the Proto-Indo-European and then Indian languages, and saw this kind of like similar kind of best theories. Okay, we have like some Proto-Afroasiatic, how the formation of the words, how they're pronounced, develop throughout all these languages that are Afroasiatic, and they took some kind of vague generalities in those processes of evolution of like word formation and vowel formation, I guess. And then they kind of did some analysis to try to see which kind of languages had most development and which had least. And allegedly that mapped on to the typical kind of view of the journey out of Africa. The most development of like kind of. I think the criteria was basically came down to like specialization of vowels, where like you have the American, natives, and especially Hawaiians, for some reason, having the most kind of quote unquote developed languages, meaning like the most far off from what's considered to be the original kind of communication of humans, whereas the Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, have the quote unquote least developed, I presume to be the closest to the original communication of all those humans in terms of like their the way that the words and the pronunciation of words work, like doesn't have as much as quote unquote refinement. Again, so that none of this is like value judgment refinement in the sense like aesthetic or something. It's just like they at least conjectured that as humans move away, when you have like a new community moving away and away and away, they have more freedom to make their like language simpler, the words, the letters, the syllables, and they do that. That was kind of the gist of the idea, I guess.
I wonder if the Neanderthals and Denisovans influenced us linguistically. That would be pretty interesting if that happened.
If Chomsky is right about his mutation in the brain producing our universal grammar kind of thing, probably Denisovans and Neanderthals didn't have language. Probably they had like some animal level communication, like grunts that reference bushes or danger, and that's that kind of thing.
I mean, saltation is very rare in evolution, and so just on priors, you should think probably not.
Oh, I disagree. Like I think like Evo Devo like showed that actually most evolution was saltations.
Oh man, this is wild. Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, when we breed cattle for certain traits, do you agree that they're not like finding rare monsters? They're just taking small differences in cattle, like in size and horn shape and stuff like that, just slowly enhancing them. That's what we're doing with cattle when we breed them.
Well, I mean that's low level messing with DNA, but what they found out in Evo Devo in like recent decades is that like lots of evolution. I mean the main point is that like there's peripheral genes and there's regulatory genes, and the regulatory genes function as if you had one of those like books, choose your own adventure. Like if you make a fork on that part, like it changes a huge deal down the road. And so when mutations happen on these regulatory genes, like that leads to some pretty big changes. And so, for example, one of the big changes in understanding of evolution that in earlier times, what they called like concurrent evolution, I think in English, they were like, oh look, there's this branch of evolution, and here they developed eyes, but these relative of theirs, like they don't have eyes, but look, this other branch of evolution that's not connected to this previous branch, they also developed eyes. Curious, it's like, and their predecessor didn't have eyes. How did that happen? Like, evolution just randomly developed eyes here and randomly developed eyes there. And then they saw that actually, like, all bilateral animals have the same set of regulatory genes. It's like set of, I think they're called hex genes, like when you Google to see more about that.
Yeah, hogs.
Or yeah, something like that. And they saw that actually this like worm from which all bilateral animals come from already had like kind of like setup for things like eyes, appendages like legs and wings, etc. And like all of the variation in all bilateral animals that exist comes down to just like shifting the regulatory genes that we all share. So it's like what they saw is that these concurrent evolutions weren't at all like, oh, they gradually developed eyes here, and just so happens on this other, branch of the evolutionary tree, they happen to also evolve eyes there. Nope, like they were both saltations because a mutation hit the same regulatory gene that's there, like since this like worm.
So one thing that your model has to account for is why we have like in linguistics there's like phonology, there's semantics, there's syntax, there's pragmatics. We seem to have the psychology related to all four of those different domains of linguistics, and one mutation doesn't seem plausible, the sort of thing that could give us different psychological relationships to those four different domains. You know?
Yeah, that's it's a bit of
kind of a stretch, you know?
But I mean, Chomsky's proposal for what the one mutation is what he calls or the effect of that one mutation is what he calls the merge function, which would basically be like our ability to form sets. So like it would work for semantics in the sense of like you can now coin terms. Like, oh, you have a basically like universal, a term cat. It's a set that includes all these things, things that you show, like examples of cat, but also things that you might abstract, like, shape and color, stuff like that. And the same function gives you this universal grammar kind of thing that Chomsky focused on working on and developing how it works. But he also expands, he says, like, and it also gives you math. Like, in the set, this set formation gives you, like, the concept of one, the concept of two, and then this goes recursively into infinity. You have the concept of infinite numbers now, you can do mathematics, etc. So, like, for him, like, this is, like, pretty big.
Yeah. With the eyes thing, with the like planaria or whatever that has like the eyes, like same genes, it might be true that like basic eye plan is common to all like chordates or whatever, but it's not as though that very basic animal with eyes had the kind of eyes we had. You still needed to mutate them to like give them eyelids and irises and pupils and eyeballs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, our eyes are nothing like that sort of like proto-eye having ancestor. So like there had to be tiny mutations along the way. You can't just turn on the regulatory genes and boom, you get an eye.
Yeah, those things would not be saltationist. I mean, like, the evo stuff doesn't say like all acquired traits are saltations, but it says that actually many of them are. Lots of the ones that we thought, we're like, oh, isn't it neat how this gradually here, like, turns out that, there were saltations. I mean, there's all those weird stuff, like from that song, that example that where I heard it first time of some sort of proteins that in the human fetus are responsible for developing the eyes. They interact with like various stem cells to like participate in formation of eyes and whatever, like during organogenesis and whatever is happening there. And you take those proteins of humans and you pump them into the rear end of a fruit fly fetus. The fruit fly fetus ends up having two sets of eyes, one on its head and one on its butt. And it's like, and of course you'd have like the fruit fly eyes, doesn't have the human eyes. But it's like weird that works. It's like,
yeah, very good. There's weird stuff like that.
another evidence for why language can't be a siltation event is that if you like knock out Warnaker's area or Broca's area, it just does different stuff to your language ability. And there's another thing that some people just like lose the noun knowledge while keeping verb knowledge and stuff like that. So there seems to be like specific parts of the brain that like handle verbs versus nouns, or like all sorts of stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and one of the reasons why I like find Chomsky's view, I guess the elegant would be a big an appropriate term here actually. So he thinks that when this singular mutation happened in the brain, or like in DNA that's responsible for brain development, the effect branched out through the brain in various neural structures. And, obviously people were like, well, wait a second, like how can a single mutation on a simple thing have a branching effect, like in a pretty big structure, biologically? And his analogy is to snowflakes forming. Is like it's obviously the case that there are certain natural laws that make things take very complex physical forms and branch out, even without any DNA to guide such, a formation. Like when you zoom into snowflakes, like there's no DNA telling the snowflakes, oh, take this form, no, take that form. But due to just interaction of some basic like natural laws, they tend to form like these very complex structures that branch out and that like have all these different forms amongst each other. He says something similar, his view is, happened to neural structures in the brain. There was one mutation that produced this like merge function that happened to produce like this branching out effect of changing neural pathways that like influenced several parts of the human brain and allowed us now to have concept formation, grammar, mathematics, etc.
Mark, I see you're battling about Cleopatra in the chat. You wanna just on mic make your case?
I mean, Cleopatra in particular, her sort of ethnic identity is one of the more
She's a Greek like
Afrocentric debates because like she's like way more indisputably not sub-Saharan African or what have you than some early Egyptian dynasty.
she's from the Greek guy named Ptolemy. Like we know who the guy she's from.
Who said she was a sub-Saharan African? I don't think anyone has ever made that claim. Even in the Netflix documentary, nobody makes that claim.
People do.
The claim is that she was quote unquote black, and that term, like I said to you before, there's different groups of people that are considered black. But the idea is that she was possibly, I mean, I don't even know for certain, possibly she had some Egyptian ancestry. I'm trying to look up her family line right now, but I think we only know about the Ptolemaic line. We don't know about her mother's side. And there was a study that was done by, I put it in the chat, where they supposedly found remains of her sister, indicating that her mother had African ancestry.
Well,
this is actually how it started. This is a very old BBC article. It's from like
so
10, 15 years ago.
It's true that there's a distinction to be made between black and sub-Saharan Africa, but I think I'm using sub-Saharan African because I think the overwhelming majority of people in that era who you would call black were in fact sub-Saharan African, and in particular the ancient Egyptians of the Hellenistic period or the Roman period were clearly, the overwhelming majority of them would not have been what you would call black. I mean, maybe there were some, people in the South who were like, maybe some of their territory overlapped with modern day Sudan or something, and you would consider them black. But those aren't the sorts of people that I think would have been common Egyptians. And moreover, I don't think that the common Egyptians were Cleopatra's ancestors. First of all, the mother of that princess Arsinoe that you're talking about, I think it may have been a different woman than Cleopatra. But more to the point, even if I'm wrong about that, I think like modern, these are like measurements taken skull or bone measurements are considered a super reliable way of gauging ethnic ancestry. And in fact, if you Google like the Wikipedia article for Cleopatra, they'll mention the specific person that you're naming as a source for the claim that Cleopatra's mother was Egyptian or black or something like that, and will say, these other scholars point out that this is not a reliable anthropological, gauge of biological ancestry.
That skull measuring could be a reliable way to gauge like personality traits and moral traits.
Well, I'm yet to see anyone address the study and try to debunk it, so I'll continue to research.
Sure,
But,
I'll post the thing I mentioned. Hold on.
share it with me, man, because to be honest, I think she was definitely Macedonian, that, and possibly she had some ancestry. But now, we start going into the Macedonians. Were the Macedonians purely Caucasian? Were they Middle Eastern? Either way, I doubt they were black anyway. But the fact that this woman in my bio, I don't know if you can see my bio, she's the one who was casted to play Cleopatra. The fact that her playing Cleopatra was so controversial, if you ask me, I think it's totally ridiculous. I think it's more than likely the Macedonians did look like her. Maybe they shouldn't have called her black. That's what people should have said. But to say that she doesn't look like Cleopatra, it's obvious what the issue is. People don't like this idea that it seems like we're trying to sub-Saharanize the civilized world of antiquity. People don't like the idea that because they think it's ahistorical, and I also think it also sort of bugs them that these primitive sub-Saharans think that they can just claim other people's history. I get that I would be frustrated too, and I do get frustrated. That's why I have a problem with the Hebrew Israelites and all these other crazy people. But the facts are the facts when it comes to ancient Egypt. And one thing we do agree on is that during the Hellenistic period, I don't think the majority of the Egyptians were black. And it's actually what's his name? Is it Pliny? There's a source that we have where they say that during the Hellenistic period there were 200,000 Egyptians who fled south because of the invasions that were coming into Egypt. So we know that people fled Egypt and went south, by the hundreds of thousands. So I won't be surprised at all if it's no longer black anymore. But of course, there were still black people there, but it's no longer a majority.
So, the reason I rankle at this is not because I think that black and or sub-Saharan African people were more primitive than Egyptians or other civilizations, and thus it's unfitting for the one to claim the legacy of the other. It's just because it has nothing to do with primitiveness, whatever the word is, or advancement. They just don't like, obvious rewriting of history in really, blatantly ahistorical and scientifically illiterate ways. And I think that's what most of these claims amount to.
I'm gonna say primitivity.
I'll have to Google it, but I'm busy on Wikipedia at the moment doing what I said I would do.
If you are interested in some data on I'm more than happy to send you some documentaries and some studies, because I do have them on my laptop. I don't have them on my phone anymore. If you are interested, because a lot of people, they tend to combat me on this, and they just leave the subject alone. But if you are interested in the truth, and if you are looking to see what the other side of the argument is outside of a Netflix or a YouTube video or some Metatron, I don't know if you know Metatron is a very famous YouTuber who does history videos. People don't actually look at the argument that people are making for the Africanness of ancient Egypt. So if you are looking for it, I can share those sources with you, because it's heavy, man. This is just way too much data, in my opinion. And of course, what do I know, right? I've already kind of discredited myself because of some of the things that I believe. But have an open mind. That's all I can say.
Kind of balk at that phrase, like people say, have an open mind, because especially in the era of Trump, where everybody seems to have come equipped with their own facts, and we all wonder where they got those facts from, because they're not the same facts that we've got. I don't know. That's makes me feel weird when you say.
So apparently, this Austrian academic, I guess her name is Thur, Thur, with an umlaut, I guess. She didn't have access to the actual. She didn't have access to the actual skeletal sample. It was apparently destroyed. Rather, she was going based on notes of measurements from like 1920, which was probably people were, modern forensic science hadn't been invented and people were less careful now. But I just don't think that there's consensus that this, even if we knew that the 100-plus-year-old notes of certain measurements that this academic is drawing from were actually accurate, I don't think there's consensus that this is a good, reliable way of determining ancestry.
Yeah, you have to collect a whole bunch of data. We also have medieval depictions. Funny enough, actually, medieval depictions of Cleopatra, of how people in medieval times thought she looked like. And she's depicted jet black. I mean, obviously, that's not it's very little. It's lower down on the scale of evidence. But obviously, all these things add up. So we need to see what else was there. But if she didn't have any Egyptian ancestry, then I doubt that she would be black. I think that's the major thing. Was she partly Egyptian, or was she partly on her mother's side or something like that? That would be the only way to really substantiate the claim. Either way, I'm neutral on it.
What race to cast?
Say that again. Say that, I can't hear you.
It feels like there are more pressing questions in history than what race should we cast Cleopatra in.
Well, Cleopatra, sure, but when it pertains to race and history, I think it's a very, very important subject because I'm sure many of you already know this. For the longest time, it has been presented to us that certain groups of people have been a footnote on human history, that they've made no contributions, that they were not involved in any of the major empires that developed what we today call civilization, that contributed to the there's just been all these lies about civilization. I mean, especially if you go back to 50, 60 years ago, Egypt was considered a white European civilization, and we just forget like things are constantly evolving. It's incredible, man. There's more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt. Most people didn't even know that until like recent times, but they're there. How do you explain these things? So it's important to understand who did what in ancient history, because a lot of reconstructing, or what they call revisionism, needs to be done, because people have been lying. Or let me be honest with you, frankly, Europeans have been lying.
That's not true. It's mostly Afrocentrists who are lying and extremely archaeologically and genetically incompetent. For example, enlisting medieval depictions of Cleopatra, that's not going to tell us anything about how she looked. And I don't even think what you're saying about that it was consistent, that they consistently portrayed her as black. I haven't looked into it, but I doubt that's true. Like maybe some of them did, but I doubt that would be a totally consistent thing. But again, you can look at like contemporary coinage from her era. It's not. It wasn't really colored or anything since it was a coin, but the features aren't obviously what we would identify as black. But again, we have pretty good records of her essentially entire family line, since there was, a lot of incest and brother-sister marriages among the Ptolemies. There's a few. There's always a possibility that, there were non-paternity events. So, one of her female ancestors cheated with some, African or black or whatever non-member of the family. But it's pure speculation. And really, it's just Afrocentrists who are really motivated to scrounge up whatever really pathetic evidence that they can find, and then try to rewrite history in order to, claim the achievements of ancient peoples or figures for groups that they personally feel a little more identification with.
How long?
And
I
feel like trying to figure out her race is missing the point. The majority of humans are footnotes to human history. We don't have records of their exploits. The gender or ethnicity of, let's just say, Aristotle
might not matter
I
to you,
disagree.
but it matters to some people. In particular, it matters a lot to Afrocentrists. They care about it whether or not you think they should. So it's important to point out the fact that they're just blatantly lying about everything and can't actually assemble any good evidence.
Well, I'm trying to more undercut the desire. I'm saying that the motivation to identify the racial identity of characters from history, except in like racially charged moments like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, in those instances, their race is relevant. But aside from that, it's missing the point. We are not tracking the identity of Aristotle and Cleopatra because of their race. Trying to identify the race is trying to score a point for certain tribes of humans. It's misunderstanding the value of the discovery of the effects that these people had on history. Or identifying their name.
Yeah, well,
I would say that
I need to jump in and respond to the Afrocentric thing, because the Afrocentrics have not been dominating academia for the last 300, 200 years.
no one is.
I'm not sure how you could accuse Afrocentrists of lying when Afrocentrism is literally a response to Eurocentrism. I don't agree with Afrocentrism myself, but to claim that Afrocentrics are the only ones lying when when literally Europeans used their reconstructions of history to justify going around enslaving and colonizing people. This is totally, well, it's just false at the end of the day. But on what Zen is saying, on what you're saying,
European consensus. The Europeans are not in concert. They are in war with each other most of the time.
We're not saying all Europeans. I know, not all.
They're
Europeans
tracking
think the same. I know.
They
not
are
all white people.
independently tracking history. If they agree with each other, that indicates a consensus.
That's fine. The point is, it's important to understand the race of people in certain histories, because history unfortunately has a political dimension to it, whether we like it or not. Because what we understand about history affects how we understand the present. So if we found out that historically one of the greatest civilizations, probably in ancient times, which is ancient Egypt and possibly even Nubia, if those two civilizations were both black African, that should change our complete perception of what we think about African people today. So it is important for those certain reasons. And perhaps it wouldn't need to be important if certain groups of people hadn't been looked down upon because of history. But because of one thing, another thing has to come down. You get what I'm saying?
Well, so, except in response to your point that people who are fixated on the ethnicity of, just to use Aristotle as an example, since you mentioned him, that they're missing the point. I guess what I would say is there's no such thing as the point. Like, you're allowed to be interested in whatever you want for whatever reason you want. And in fact, this isn't just limited to Afrocentrists. Like, if we did in fact discover tomorrow, smoking gun proof, that Aristotle was actually an ethnic Chinese man whose parents came from the surroundings of the Yellow River or something, they'd be immensely interested in this, and there'd be a ton of really cool and interesting research published on it. And it wouldn't be correct to say, hey, classicists, stop, you're focused on the wrong thing. We need to talk about the metaphysics instead, or Nicomachean ethics. Like, it's fine to be interested in the ethnic identity of this or that individual or this or that person group, and you're not doing anything wrong. What you're only doing something wrong if you're coming to like blatantly incorrect conclusions about it and lying out of a sense of like ethnic chauvinism. And I think that's essentially what Afrocentrists are doing. They are, in fact, maybe lying is too strong a word, because I'm sure they're sincere in their belief, but they are telling valor based on massive amounts of extreme ignorance, and just trying to turn it around and say no, Europeans lied in the past. Well, maybe some Europeans got some important things wrong. Maybe they even originally did it in, say, the 19th or 18th centuries for their own sort of white ethnocentric reasons. I'm happy to be on board with a historical claim of that sort. But I think today, in the present, they're obviously not particularly Eurocentric, or at least not Eurocentric to say in the present that Egyptians were European or white, or would have looked like the average Briton or whatever of that period. Like, I think they have a grounded, reality-based view of the world and population genetics overall, and you, as an Afrocentrist, do not.
You think I'm an Afrocentrist, Mark? Just asking for clarity.
Yeah, for the reasons I mentioned when I was describing earlier in the conversation why.
Because of the Dogon thing and the fact that I think ancient Egypt was black.
you're not an extreme one. Like you're not claiming
For sure.
like you're not claiming Greece. You're not claiming like. I literally watched a YouTube video of a guy being like. Actually, I'll just go play it because I have it right here.
Like, you don't.
Sorry, so he's talking about Shakespeare. He's calling him. He's called Shakespeare undoubtedly black.
Shakespeare?
Yeah.
It's kind of late.
I think you're pretty moderate in terms of Afrocentrism as far as Afrocentrism goes, and I don't think there's a huge political component, and therefore, I'm not really upset about it. Like, for you, it's more like kind of historical curiosity that has relatively limited impact on the contemporary world, so I don't think it's like a really virulent form or anything. Nevertheless, as someone who, I think of you as a smart person who's sincerely interested in history, like, I want to I want you to understand for your own sake and your own, I'm sure, interest in believing true things over false things, that the ancient Egyptians were not, in fact, black. They're basically pretty much the same people as the modern Egyptians, with minor differences.
Just to mention, there is a famous ancient Greek philosopher who wasn't a Greek, the founder of Stoicism. Zeno. He was a Semite from Phoenicia, like ethnically. So.
There may be a sense in which that was true, but they're all Greek.
Even the founder of this Greek story about Cadmus. Cadmus was said to be the creator of the Greek language, and he came from North Africa. I think he was from Libya.
Yeah. See, my claim about the ethnicity of Aristotle and Cleopatra missing the point. I agree with you that like if we had biographical details of any character from history that placed them in a different ethnic or racial region, that would be relevant in terms of understanding the impact that person had on history. Right? We could discuss Aristotle's cousin as being pivotal for history, but it would be untrue. The very definition of the effect he has on history is based on the references other people had, the studies that they have. I'm not saying that his conclusions are correct. I want to be clear. Like, we don't necessarily need to debate Aristotle's philosophy. I'm simply saying that the effect Aristotle had on society, other people reading his philosophy and writings, that's what's relevant. That's like the nexus point of history. There was some human animal that all the human animals afterwards kept focusing on. And his personal biographical details become relevant because we can see how one person's individual story can lead to the direction of multiple generations afterwards. The racial makeup is irrelevant except to point us to other biographical details. Where did his father come from? What about his mother? Was he trained with this racial ethnicity or this other one in this region of the world or this other one? Those are relevant points, but they're all relevant building up to the nexus event that is that human being and the effect they had on history. The reason I'm pushing that as the essence is that's what it means to be history, to translate certain events in certain regions from different races and people into a global effect that all of humanity has incorporated into its collective consciousness. And in the case of Cleopatra and Aristotle, their race would only direct us to biographical details, like whether Cleopatra came from the Egyptians or the Greeks, as history indicates she came from the Greeks. The racial makeup is just missing the point. Unless you want to bring it right back to the historical relevance of the person, like Cleopatra, let's say she's black. Okay, so then that's one narrative about a black ruler that had certain effects on them. And let's say she's white. Okay, that's a different story. It's relevant in terms of, again, the historic effect that it has on society. And historically, I don't think she was even accepted as black ever. I don't think those terms existed in her day. She was Greek from the Ptolemies.
The terms definitely existed, but I hear what he's saying. I just think that it's important to study the culture out of which someone like Aristotle could have emerged. Like, for example, we know that, at least I would say, clearly, an Aristotle could not have emerged out of, let's say, my tribe, for example, the Kamba or the Zulu people, because my people, the civilization that we developed could not have produced an Aristotle, and at least not at the stage of development that they were at that time.
See, I wouldn't even say that Aristotle is a great genius per se. I'd say it's more indications of how many cultures do we have in the past Like, that answers your question into why we have a Eurocentrism in our conception of history more than an Afrocentrism, because of the writings. We can track Aristotle and the writings about him from the moment he's published until the current day. We can't do that with the majority of the wisdoms and cultures of Africa.
Well, that's true, and that's why I'm not Afrocentric, because I know what it takes to build a civilization. You need languages, and unfortunately, most of what I call sub-Saharan Africa, because sub-Saharan is a dumb retarded term. Most of Africa is sub-Saharan, but sub-Saharan Africa beneath the Sahel, which is where most of the Bantus and the Nilots are, there's like virtually no writing systems. There's no way an Aristotle could have emerged in an environment like that, and you can see the standard of civilization. Look, go ahead, Mark. Sorry, I keep.
Okay, well, just to respond to what makes sense, I mean, I think you're projecting in the very precise sense that you're really reporting to me on what you care about and what you think is relevant to history, and then imagining that that's true for everyone. But it's not true for everyone. If you only care about biographical facts or genealogical facts about Aristotle insofar as it casts light on Aristotle's philosophy and its impact on the intellectual development of civilization, that's perfectly fine, and you're welcome to have that attitude. But someone else, like Ben, who is interested in Aristotle's or Cleopatra's ancestry for its own sake, essentially, he's not doing anything wrong. He's not missing any points. He just cares about different things than you, and that's fine.
Yeah, I'm interested in everyone's ethnicities, Aristotle especially.
I'm not saying that it's what I have in history. I'm saying this is collectively what humans are after in the history. The consensus of people that
I'm after the whole truth, not just about what makes me feel comfortable.
Right. I mean, that's the difference. I would say that is. I mean, projection is too charged a word, but you know what I mean. Like, there's no one thing that the whole of humanity is ultimately after. Like, this is ultimately a statement about what you are after and that what you would like other people to care about. But
not exactly. I agree with you. Not all people are after
they
one
don't
thing.
care about it, and that's okay. I mean,
rather
they care about it, but also care about other things.
I'm not trying to give my impression of what I want when I study history. I'm trying to give my impression of what it looks like humans are after when they study history. It's slight distinction, but I'm not trying to project. I'm trying to say this is my evaluation of what the study of history seems to be.
But humans are clearly after other things in addition to understanding the story of grand civilization development.
I agree with you. Humans want like a lot of stuff with their stories and their history and the narratives that they create. I'm simply saying that, like, collectively, if I look at the study, its goals and orientations, is trying to gain consensus about certain pivotal moments in our past.
Well, it's that plus other things, like who in fact is responsible for the pivotal moments, which groups. Humans collectively really, really, really care about those things because they have various Eurythmists or nationalistic or otherwise sentimental attachments to some regions and some histories more than others, and they want to champion them.
Well, I also want to say that another reason we shouldn't care about Aristotle's racial makeup is that even if it turned out that he was black or Chinese or whatever, like we would still consider him primarily Greek because he had a well-known fondness for taking it up.
That's true. I thought he was pretty straight.
I'm going to go to
So you guys, I'm disagree. Here's this tradition of it's like ignore the racial focus on the physiognomy of like a long face, a long nose, large hind eyes, you know what I mean? Like those traditions. Do you think all women kind of look like that? Or do you think this was like a continued tradition that developed? Or do you think this is just the fact that like when a cartoonist would draw someone really nice looking, they would kind of draw it looking like this? Like we just have like this idea of like this is like maybe like in our brain exaggerated features of what kind people look like. Which of these three do you think is most like? And ignore the racial stuff. I mean
Have you like looked into the Wikipedia page on the physical appearance of Jesus?
No.
It gives some fascinating data points. I think some of which I added like 15 years ago or something, or how like in early Wikipedia, I don't know how how much it exists. But, so there's this like early Christian debate about the looks of Jesus, and the Eastern Church Fathers seemingly have this weird view that he is very short and ugly and probably hunchback for some reason.
So that was Paul.
And no, Paul doesn't say anything. Like these are like early church fathers.
Yeah, it's even in the Slavonic passage of Josephus describes it as hunchback.
They have like various kind of, and they say this fulfills various prophecies from Isaiah. That he will be scorned, etc., etc. But then among the Latin church fathers, you get like people, Augustine and some others who say, like, no, he's like God incarnate, he was perfect, so he needs to be perfect in his body too. And then basically he starts looking like a younger version of Zeus, kind of, like in representations of the church at that time. Before that, we don't have any representations. Like there's some catacomb pictures where he looks kind of like a Roman professor. Like he's depicted with a toga and like short hair. And I think in one of those the frescoes he's slightly balding and has short hair. Doesn't look either like the descriptions of the early church fathers or like the later, okay, like Augustine influenced image that is now mainstream.
I think, Sam, to answer your question, I find it very unlikely that somebody of that importance, if he did physically exist, that people would just forget what that man looked like. I think that a lot of these portraits that we have are hinting on some kind of, subconscious truth or something like that. I just find it very difficult that people would just forget what he looks like.
And the descriptions even mentioned specifically here was the English term joined eyebrows, like full, like unibrow.
It's I don't know. I've never seen any text except for that Slavonic passage of Josephus, that 1500s, I think. It was translated by someone called Isla. And actually, that obviously I know that one because there's a lot of controversy around. I'm not going to go into what it says he looked like, but you know how the Russians have been depicting Jesus lately. But either way, I do think that more or less the general understanding that humanity has of Jesus is probably accurate. There's just something about where you've got like billions of people focusing on one guy. What are the odds that they're going to completely miss what he looked like?
I mean,
Like maybe there's like some kind of subconscious
Pretty big
memory that we have.
according to these early church fathers, I guess.
Well, I gave the three models. I gave that kind of look like that there's just a contingent tradition that develops, and then once it has sort of like once we have an image of what Harry Potter looks like, you can't change. Like when we all have an image of Harry Potter, though it didn't exist. And then the third is just exaggerated physiognomy. So like if you ask someone to draw like the platonic ideal of a bully or the platonic ideal of a wise man or the platonic ideal of like a sexy lover man, they would kind of look different from each other. A cartoonist can draw them in a way that feels psychologically satisfying to us. So like it might just be the picture of Jesus is like our brain's ideal of like what a wise man looks like, kind but masculine, young but not too young.
Yeah, what's his name? It's Herodotus. Because now we have to get into like what did the Jews look like? What descriptions do we have of the Jews? So that would be one of the methodologies that we would need to be able to figure out what Jesus looked like.
They were also
What do you think Jesus looks like?
I think I think that the Jews are made up of various ethnicities, but more or less look like the groups that you see in Israel today, and also or Palestine, whatever you want to call it, and the groups that you see in the Horn of Africa, specifically Ethiopia, Eritrea. And I also think that the ancient Egyptians probably look like those people as well, people in Eritrea, Ethiopia in particular. There's also I think it's Josephus, who mentioned that the Jews were said to be of Ethiopian origin. I'm not too sure exactly, but one thing I am certain of is that the group of people who are described as the Hyksos in ancient Egyptian records, those are the people that match the Israelites, and you can clearly see their murals on the walls of Egypt, and they look just like the Middle Easterners today. I'm sure you guys know about the Hyksos, right?
There's the Hyksos, there's the Hero, and there's another.
Yeah, the Habiru. Yeah.
And there's the third group, which is there's another group that people think is even more plausible than the two of those. Maybe look that up.
They were in an alliance together, the Hyksos and the Habiru. Manetho tells us that they were in an alliance together and that they left Egypt following the renegade family. Yeah, the Shasu, yeah. The Shasu were the nomads. And the Shasu worship a god named Yahweh.
Yeah, I think the Shasu were the most likely to be become Semites. Like the fact that they worship Yahoo, come on, like.
Yes, right then. Yeah, the Shasu very good.
Refer to themselves as the Hebrew.
The Ha'ibri or something. I heard that from Professor Kamen.
I think it's pretty mainstream that Yahweh was imported among the Canaanites, kind of like the Midianite kind of North Arabic area.
Now you see, an Afrocentric will say the Israelites were, they'll even use the term Negroid to try and, because a lot of Afrocentric thought actually comes from 20th and 19th century sources. People like Von Lee and people like Godfrey Higgins, European radical writers saying the Sumerians were Negroid, because people were Negroid, everyone was Negroid.
Well, they're not really univocal. There are Afrocentrists who only want to reclaim Israel, not Egypt, and others who only want to reclaim Egypt, but not Israel. And I don't think that you're I think you're a very moderate one. But even you seem to think that, sorry, I sort of looked into this, a lot of Israelites were essentially East African, not all of them, but a lot of them were East African adherents, which seems like obvious Afrocentrism, obvious moderate Afrocentrism.
I don't know. Just the idea that Africans were present in the Israelite tradition.
I don't know.
That's African.
Yeah, presence is a kind of term. I'm sure there was at least one East African guy from East African extraction.
Oh, that's way too little. That's like non-existent. When I say present, I mean like whole tribes of Africans.
Yeah.
Israelite tradition.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's definitely not going to be the case. There's no discernible sub-Saharan or East African component of the genetics of ancient Lebanese samples, and our samples there are much better than our samples in ancient Egypt because the autosomal DNA is mostly conserved.
I thought that Eritrean, Ethiopian stuff looked kind of Semitic because of the Arab trade that happened
Yeah,
later.
they're definitely close
They speak Semitic languages. All the Semitic languages. Most of them are in Africa. They're in Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Well, some of them are Semitic. A lot of their languages are Semitic. But I'm talking in terms of genetics, not in terms of proper language.
Yeah.
Semitic language.
I'll come to genetics because it's true. Most of the Levantine samples that we have in the Middle East, I don't think, unless you want to go all the way to the Natufians, I don't want to go there. But most of the Levantine samples that we have right now, sure, they don't seem to East African, or use the term sub-Saharan. Don't see how that term applies right now. But remember, the story of the Israelites is that they were scattered, and they, of course, during their time in Egypt, they migrated back they migrated to the Middle East, and then when the Assyrians came in, the 10 tribes in the north were scattered. And there's even traditions in the Talmud that say that tribes of Israelites migrated into Africa. So you can't just ignore these things. And then Josephus saying that the Israelites were thought to be of Ethiopian origin, and the fact that all these the tribes in Ethiopia invited to Israel, they are considered to be authentic Jews. This is not controversial. Ethiopians being Jews.
Well, it's not controversial that they are valid religious Jews. It's simply controversial that they descended from any
mean, I don't disagree with much of what you said, but of course we have evidence that East African genetics is in the Middle East. I just Googled it now. It's even on Wikipedia. The migrations between people in the Middle East and East Africa is very well known. And I know you don't like me citing movie stories. There's one movie story.
Well, I mean, I've already agreed with that point. Actually, I only
so
sort
you
of briefly said
agree on
you might not have caught it since I only mentioned it offhandedly, but I think everyone agrees that there's a West Asian component to most populations in the sort of Horn of Africa region. That's uncontroversial.
and
But
there's
that,
also an East African component in populations in the Middle East.
well, yes, although depending on which group you're talking about, I mean, that may well be something more recent than say 2,000 years ago. But I would be less surprised if places like Yemen, which are basically right next door. That said,
Right, and they're visibly phenotypically black skin. Most people in Yemen.
right. That said, I mean, the people there would not have looked like ancient. The people in ancient Judeans. Sorry, Matt. Let me re-say that. The people in ancient Judea would not look like East Africans, even on the East African migration model. Rather, they would, they all would have looked basically the same, maybe like average Levantine Middle Easterners. Then some of them moved south and intermingled with the darker skinned ethnic people who are living in East Africa, and then the resulting admixture would have looked something more similar to what we see in East Africans today. But there wouldn't just be they wouldn't have looked like East Africans before moving south.
Maybe I don't know about the. Go ahead. So that actually you go. Go ahead, and then I'll come.
No, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Well, when it comes to the Judea, because remember Judea was, if we believe the Israelites' tradition, some people think that this whole thing is nonsense. But Judea was named after Judah. This is one of the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel. So there were 12 tribes. The 3 of them were in the south, which was Judea, the Judeans, the Levites, and the Benjamites. That they lived in what's called Judea, and they were called Yahudis, right, by the Romans who came there. All the first century sources called them Yahudis, named after Judah. And then in the north, before the Romans came in, you had 10 other tribes, and I can't list all of them, but they're all named after the sons of Jacob.
Centuries too late to see the relevant distinction between the Judeans and the Israelites.
Well, do you think that they would all be ethnically the same? All 12 tribes?
In that era, they would be more united. The Judean-Israeli distinction existed before the first destruction, way before the Romans. It's the Babylonian.
Yes, it did. Yes, and my point is that that distinction is important. And if you think that all the
No, but what I'm trying to say is that identifying a people referred to as Judeans from the first century, whether you mean BCE or CE, is going to be a much later group of Jews than the original Jews.
Exactly. That's my point. That's my point exactly. And I'm saying that those other tribes who were scattered before the Romans came in, their genetics has not been isolated, and I don't think we can assume that they would be exactly the same as the Judeans, because the 12 tribes is an allegory. All 12 tribes are not necessarily genetically the same. Just like the 3 sons of Noah are not all genetically the same. They have 3 different continents that we belong to. This whole Abrahamic tradition it's a very multicultural thing. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. Go ahead, son.
We can assume that they were probably at least, if not exactly identical, it's at least very, very similar, because it's the sort of norm for geographical neighbor, like very close geographical neighbors, to be very genetically similar, like mass migrations in that era. That would result in large genetic turnover, just weren't really that common. And moreover, extra surprising if the tribes in the north were really similar to East Africans far to the south, the ones in between were genetic outliers. So even if we can't say for absolute certain, it's a very safe bet that whatever lost tribes there were, and I'm not even sure there were 10 of them or whatever, 9 or 10 of them. It's a very safe bet that they were genetically similar to other Middle Eastern populations of the time.
Okay, I just have a question. If we found East African samples from first century Judea, would that change your mind?
Well, it depends. I mean, it could. It's going to depend.
I mean, on the same level that we have, modern Levantine samples that match the modern day Jews.
Well, again, it depends on what you mean by level. But if we found considerable quantity of them that were like very clearly, unmistakably East African rather than merely quote unquote Levantine and sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. And we're on the same page then.
Something you said earlier, which I think was interesting, is that you don't really believe in the out-of-Africa theory. And I think there's a clear sense in which we did evolve in Africa, but there's a sense in which we didn't, because there's this whole thing of the Homo erectus left Africa and then made a whole, like, traveled around the world, and then Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, and then they traveled around the world and intermixed with the killed and intermixed with, like, the various, like, other humanoid groups, and then, like, they come back into Africa and they, like, mix together, so it was kind of like a complicated stew, you know? It didn't just happen in Africa.
Yeah, my theory is try not to take them to, because here's what the genetics is showing. The oldest mitochondrial line seems to be in southern Africa. I think it's amongst the Khoisan.
Yeah.
And the oldest white, I think it's called white, the male one, the oldest male line is found in Central Africa or in Cameroon. And there's actually a man, there's also a Black American man who shares the same DNA as well, named Albert Perry. So it's very clear that the oldest genetics of human beings is in Africa. But, my theory, it goes a little bit outside of, but let's just focus on that, because I want to share it now, because I don't want to lose any more credibility. But if you are interested, I'll share it with you another time. But it has a lot to do with, like, migrations and cataclysms and stuff like that, and how a population can become the seeding ground for a new age of humanity. And,
I think there was just, like, various cataclysms, like, how many, what's the cycle are we on? These like, cataclysms?
I'll use the sort of like the Indian term for it. In India, they have this idea of root races. It was a philosophical idea, but it's borrowed from something in I think it's in the Puranas or the Mahabharata, I can't remember. Supposedly we're in the fifth age. There's been 5 cycles. In India, they have trillion cycles. So try and divide 5. Maybe you'll get the number. But these are all stories and allegories. So I don't know, to be very honest with you, in terms of, there's not an empirical discussion. Now we're just talking about beliefs and what's in India and what's, But did I answer your question?
Yeah. I know you're uncomfortable talking about this stuff, but
yeah, in these spaces I'm not comfortable. Disrespecting me, and then nobody's good in these kind of spaces. People won't take me seriously when I start talking about these things.
I understand. Blavatsky has got some colorful views, and
she does.
I think that. Yeah, I actually don't know too much about them, but I know that what I have read is, like, it's pretty spicy. Like, I think she believes in, like, stuff like Atlantis and stuff like that, and I don't even know.
Yep.
You're a serial killer because she probably, accepts you for that. So,
They go around and build these imaginations for the seller. All of it. It's documented information. So I've come to terms that, the further we get away from the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the more a Muslim personally have to rely upon, like, spirituality, because inside of you, you're gonna go through so many turmoil, because the external side of you is also gonna see what is going on in this world, and you have to figure out, like, how do I navigate this? Like, I see nothing of the Sunnah in today's time. How do I navigate this? And that's where, like, purifying your nafs is so essential. Having some type of, like, zuhd, abstaining, even if it's just like one day, you just abstain from the dunya, you put your phone up, something, or you fast, consistently working on your nafs and your ruh, because this world we think is bad now is going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. There's going to come a time, there's going to be so-called Muslim leaders going to say, I don't believe in the Quran. They're going to stand up and say, I don't believe in the Quran. Yeah, somebody messed this up. Well, I don't believe there was a Prophet Muhammad. It's going to keep getting worse. So we have to make sure that our inside has a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We hold fast to our prayer. We hold fast to just the Sharia, in a sense of just what Allah called for us to do, for us to establish justice, for us to enjoy what is good, forbid what is evil, for us to protect our families from the hellfire, for us to make sure that we pray, we're fasting. These small little things that we think are small, wallahi alazim, they're huge, because our society, I'm not saying never, I don't like the word never, but in the near future, would never resemble an Islamic identity. I don't care if you go to the most holy, quote unquote, holy country in the world that is.
Please don't scream. I'm just trying to become.
Are viral, miles on them, because you will put miles and miles and miles on these jeans. Now, these are the best.
Nan-in, a Japanese master during the Meiji era, received